If it's Friday, the Trump campaign faces new fallout after the former president says his political rival, Liz Cheney, wouldn't be such a war hawk with, quote, 9 barrels shooting at her as the Harris campaign seizes on his violent rhetoric in the closing days of this campaign. Plus, Vice President Harris hits a key Midwest battleground with multiple stops in Wisconsin as new polls show her deadlocked in a margin of error race across every mission-critical blue wall state. And bipartisan election officials meet the press. I'll talk to 4 Secretaries of State from across the nation about what they're doing to keep the vote and their election workers safe and secure in the face of misinformation, lies, lawsuits, and threats of violence. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington with just 4 days to go. The candidates are turning their attention to the closely contested Midwestern battlegrounds, which could make or break their chances on election night. Former President Donald Trump hitting both Michigan and Wisconsin today, and Vice President Kamala Harris making multiple stops in Wisconsin, as new polling shows a tight race in every one of these all-important Midwest battlegrounds: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. With the race neck and neck, Mr. Trump remains focused on his base, appearing with right-wing provocateurs, leaning into election misinformation, anti-immigrant rhetoric, and dark and at times even violent campaign imagery. The former president also ramping up his attacks on his perceived political enemies. Here he is at an event with Tucker Carlson last night, going after former Republican Congresswoman, now a Harris supporter, Liz Cheney.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I used to I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
Now, former Congresswoman Cheney slammed those remarks, calling Mr. Trump a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man. The vice president using the moment to once again draw a contrast with her own closing argument.
He has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president.
Now, this afternoon, Mr. Trump attempting to clarify his remarks on both social media and during a stop in Dearborn, Michigan. Take a look.
I said if you ever gave her a rifle and let her do the fighting, if you ever do that, she wouldn't be doing too well, I will tell you right now. But she's a war hawk. She wants to go kill people unnecessarily. And if she had to do it herself and she had to face the consequences of battle, she wouldn't be doing it.
The former president's violent imagery comes amid a campaign that has promised retribution for his supporters, calling his political opponents the enemy from within and threatening to jail domestic critics. The former president has also amplified posts on social media suggesting Liz Cheney, among others, should face a military tribunal. Beyond the increasingly inflammatory rhetoric targeting Cheney, Mr. Trump is also closing his campaign with a series of insults and personal attacks on President Biden and Vice President Harris. Here's more from that same freewheeling and unfiltered late-night event that took place in Arizona.
We do have an enemy from within. We have some very bad people, and those people are also very dangerous. The J6 committee, they call it the J6 Select Committee, like select. They're not select, they're scum. She's a low IQ individual. She doesn't even know she's lying. She's a very low IQ individual. She's dumb as a rock. When that sleazebag said during the debate, she said, oh, your rallies aren't well attended and people leave. They don't leave, and they're really well intended. We can't get places big enough. We've become a stupid country. We're run by stupid people. And you're tired of it. When Biden got up with the red background, the pink background, and he looked like the devil, he looked so stupid, right? And he said, "We will stop MAGA. MAGA, we're going to..." I said, "Listen, you stupid bastard."
Now, that kind of rhetoric is a major departure from any traditional presidential campaign, but it's also a departure from Mr. Trump's own closing message in 2016 when he largely stuck to the script, focusing on conservative bread and butter issues with anti-establishment and populist rhetoric. So with just 4 days to go, the big question right now, will his closing argument work, or will Vice President Harris's? Joining me now from Michigan, where Trump is set to speak later this hour, is NBC's Shaquille Brewster. Aaron Gilchrist is just outside Milwaukee covering the Harris campaign. And also with me, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an NBC News political analyst. Thanks to all of you for joining us on a very big Friday. Shaq, let me start with you, and let's pick up right there. Look, this isn't the traditional closing message that you typically hear from a traditional candidate. Trump has never been a traditional candidate, but we know that he is getting a lot of pressure to try to get back on track, to focus on the issues where he's strongest, the economy and immigration. What are sources telling you?
Yeah, and, you know, that's what the campaign is signaling will be the message when he gets here to Warren, and expected to be on stage in about a half hour or so. But make no doubt about it, this Liz Cheney comment has been a distraction for the campaign. It is rare that you see the campaign release multiple statements in the morning trying to clarify something. Then you had that Truth Social post that you ticked through where Donald Trump tried to explain what he was saying. And then he was asked about it by NBC's Garrett Haake at that restaurant in Dearborn, and he tried to both clarify and double down on the idea that Liz Cheney is a war hawk, but not really addressing whether that more violent imagery of a gun facing her direction or being put in her face, not addressing if that was a necessary message to have. But you really get the sense that beyond what Donald Trump is saying, there's what the campaign just wants him to focus on. And when you look at how they're billing this event, for example, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about inflation, they're talking about auto workers. That is clearly the message I think would be successful in an area like this. What Donald Trump says on stage is always the X factor here, and we'll see what that is in a couple of minutes.
Well, Shaq, let's talk about some of the down ballot races. Obviously, a hotly contested Senate race there in Michigan. Are Republicans in down ballot races concerned that this type of rhetoric could actually hurt their chances?
If there are, they're not showing it at this point. I'll tell you, I just saw Congressman Mike Rogers here at the rally. He's, of course, going up against Alyssa Slotkin for that Senate seat, a competitive Senate seat that we've definitely seen get tighter in recent weeks. And he told me he's feeling good. He feels like he's receiving the momentum at the right time in this campaign, and believes that, of course, he says that he believes he's on path to victory. But in terms of the messaging, I think my conversation with him underscored the point you're making, which is he did not mention Liz Cheney. He did not want to really get into the back and forth that you're hearing. What he highlighted with me was the fact that he's been endorsed by agricultural workers, the success that he says he has with more of the working class auto workers here. So it's, again, that divide where you have local or down ballot candidates focusing on what are those issues that poll higher when you talk to the American people about what they care most about, the economy, immigration, inflation. But then you have Donald Trump on a different message like we saw last night in Arizona.
Final 30 seconds here, Shaq. Trump also laying the groundwork, it seems like, for contesting the election, arguing there's already been instances, baselessly arguing, of things not going well, of cheating.
Yeah, and he's pointing to Pennsylvania. We've seen him do that earlier this week. And last night on that stage, he also said that essentially the only way he would lose, the only way they could defeat us is if they cheat. Of course, there's no evidence of any widespread cheating at this point. There was no evidence of that in the 2020 election, but that did not stop him from making that claim. So it seems as if that is going to be a continued message that he has, especially when, you know, look, elections are not always perfect. There are sometimes hiccups with voting machines or with long lines, different things like that. You've seen this campaign try to take advantage of those hiccups to try to back up his claims of fraud and widespread cheating.
All right, Shaq Brewster for us in Warren, Michigan. Really appreciate it. Shaq, Aaron Gilchrist, let me head over to you covering the Harris campaign. They immediately jumped on those comments about Liz Cheney. What are your sources inside the campaign, inside Harris's orbit, telling you about the strategy moving forward?
Well, Kristen, you've seen the vice president hold these almost daily, we call them gaggles, these sort of news media pop-ups that she does either in a hotel or outside the plane before she takes off or after she lands. And she's been addressing these comments, these statements that the former president makes almost on a daily basis to say, look at this. These are examples of what we've been telling you Donald Trump is like and what a second Donald Trump administration would be like. We heard a senior campaign official say earlier today that the former president is getting more extreme and that he's clearly focused on enemies as opposed to being focused on solving problems, which the vice president has said she is focused on doing. In each of these instances where she's had to talk about comments that Donald Trump has made, she's also taken those opportunities to say this is very much in contrast to what she would do as president, the way that she wants to proceed in focusing on finding solutions for the American people, focusing on bringing different voices to the table to help her find those solutions, sort of suggesting that she wouldn't exclude anyone from the conversation were she to win in November, and saying that that is the difference between her and Donald Trump. Those are things that she's been elevating in these comments. At the same time, we've also heard her talk about her belief that he is unstable and unhinged, and we've also heard her talk about her ideas for what she would do in a Harris administration, things around the economy. For example, today she is here in Wisconsin, spending some time just a little west of here, talking at a union hall with union workers there, presenting ideas again for how she would build up the economy and how she would support unions. She'll be crisscrossing this state a bit today, talking to different constituencies, again, trying to build out this coalition. I think pushing forward the idea that the campaign has pushed forward several times, Kristen, that they're not leaving any votes on the table.
All right, Aaron Gilchrist for us. Aaron, thank you very much from the Trail. Peter Baker, let me head over to you. Let's talk big picture here. You know, it's striking because you have the comments that Donald Trump made while sitting there with Tucker Carlson, not sitting with Nikki Haley, of course, someone who he ran against in the primary, someone who netted a lot of votes in the primary. If ultimately Donald Trump loses, will it be events like last night that are part of the reason why, Peter?
Well, yeah, I think, look, he has, of course, redefined the Republican Party. It's not George Bush's Republican Party or Ronald Reagan's Republican Party. And those who are of the old ilk are no longer really welcome. I was struck at the Madison Square Garden event last Sunday. I was there in New York for that. And the last 5 or 6 people who spoke before Trump spoke, his final warm-up act people, were not Republican luminaries, not, elected officials, not former presidents or former presidential nominees or candidates who have come around to him. They were his 2 sons, his daughter-in-law, his wife, and 2 billionaires. Those are the people he had as his final speakers. And of course, the speakers who came before those final ones were full of, racist jokes and outrageous statements. And the thing is, it's not that Trump actually minded, right? He had to take back the one on Puerto Rico, but he didn't disavow the rest of it. This is all part of the message. The message is, in fact, this very testosterone-driven message. Us versus them. They are the party of weakness. We're rough and tough men who can handle, a dangerous world. And if we're raw and crude, that's part of the appeal.
It's such a great point. And of course, it comes against the backdrop of this historic gender gap that we are seeing with Harris having a huge lead among women, but Trump with an even bigger lead among men. Let me follow up with you on that event at Madison Square Garden and the Puerto Rico jokes. The Harris campaign jumped all over those comments, the comments that he made about women voters, saying he'll protect women whether or not they like it, the Liz Cheney comments. Do you think the Harris campaign has been effective? How do you assess their response to some of these moments? And I should add, President Biden's comments, in which he created quite a complicated mix for Kamala Harris.
He certainly didn't make it easier for her. That's right. When he said that he was outraged by those remarks, the jokes about Puerto Rico, and that the real garbage was Trump's supporters. And then he says demonization of people. Now, the Republicans are saying he said that Trump supporters are garbage. And of course, the White House is arguing he was saying that it was the demonization by Trump supporters that is garbage. Either way, it was an unnecessary distraction. But you're right that the Harris strategy here is to take the comments that Trump or his surrogates are making, the ones that are so outrageous, the ones that are so provocative, and trying to peel off even small groups of constituents in particular states or particular, demographic groups or what have you. Because in fact, if this race is going to come down to a few thousand votes in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, every single vote matters. If you find just, a handful of Puerto Rican American voters, remember, of course, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, even though Trump didn't seem to know that at first when he was president. If you find that they, living in Pennsylvania, might be offended, you might want to make sure you emphasize that to them. You want to amplify the message about women in order to get, your strongest supporters to turn out in the larger numbers that you need them. So they're taking advantage of every misstatement, or I don't even call them a misstatement because I don't think that Trump thinks they're just misstatements. The Harris people do, and they're trying to jump on every single one of these to remind voters why the election on Tuesday is important, why it matters to them to turn out.
Peter, very quickly before I let you go with our last 30 seconds here, Trump really embracing RFK Jr., saying that he would bring him into his administration, would put him in charge of health care. We know that RFK Jr. is a vaccine skeptic. Is that type of rhetoric potentially risking alienating some undecided, some more moderate voters?
Well, I think, look, Trump has from the beginning of this campaign tacked so strongly to the right, so much stronger toward conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists, even than he did in his previous two campaigns, embracing people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on vaccines. I don't think he had done that in his previous campaigns, but he is leaning heavily on that part of the electorate this time. That does, of course, risk alienating more moderate, particularly suburban voters who think vaccines are actually good, that they've put vaccines in the arms of all of their children because that's what we do in this society, and that's been a good thing and a healthy thing. But we'll see what difference it makes at this point. I think that for Trump, RFK Jr. is kind of a wild card at this point.
Yeah, it's certainly one more X factor in an election where we have a number of them. Peter Baker, you always give us the 30,000-foot view. We really appreciate your insights and analysis. Thank you so much. Great to see you. Good luck next week. Coming up, a Democrat known for her candor and her deep Michigan roots, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell joins me as both Trump and Harris hit her state today and as her party fights to shore up the blue wall. Plus, securing the vote in battleground Pennsylvania as the former president stokes fears of election fraud and Democrats sound the alarm about a key county's handling of mail-in ballots. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Very quickly, 2 months ago, you were very worried about Michigan. Where do you stand now?
I'm not on a sugar high. I'm not Debbie Downer. I'm Debbie determined. It is a purple state, and we are going to be purple until Election Day. And we cannot stop working until those polls are closed and every last vote is counted.
Welcome back. That was Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell on set with me at the Democratic National Convention this August, sharing her thoughts about battleground Michigan, her home state. Vice President Harris will be in Michigan this Sunday, highlighted by an evening rally in Lansing in one of her final stops before Election Day. And joining me once again is Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. She is chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Congresswoman Dingell, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, and 4 more days or 3 days and something and counting.
It's hard to believe we are so close. We are in the final sprint. So you heard yourself there back in August. I have to get an update for you. How are you feeling right now about the state of the race in Michigan, Congresswoman?
Look, I'm going to be really honest with you. I knew we were going to be tight. And said it's going to be a purple state and every vote's going to matter until the polls close. I really am going to tell you it is that tight right now. I do not believe either candidate has won Michigan yet. I think I'd rather be in our shoes than President Trump's, but who votes is really going to determine what the outcome of this election is. And I may be willing, after spending a weekend in many, many different places, from union halls to veterans halls to farmers market, schools, tailgates, be willing to make a prediction. But right now, this is a very, very competitive state.
And I'm curious, Congresswoman, what specifically are you seeing on the ground there? Because obviously President Biden was able to flip Saginaw and Kent counties. Do you see Harris winning those 2 areas?
So, you know, these are very complicated. And by the way, as you talk about both of those, they're competitive Senate seat and congressional seats in those areas as well. Many people are saying it's Michigan, 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 because we have 2 open House seats and a third competitive House seat. Well, I believe women are clearly breaking for the vice president, and I am guessing, hoping, feeling there's going to be a significant turnout of the women. There are 4 areas that I have been watching for the last month. Union halls. I mean, clearly, the vice president's not going to get all of the union workers, but she is. I think there's been a lot of work. I myself been in union hall every day this week, as have many other people. And I think that when you do the comparison between the 2 candidates, she is going to get more votes than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. There was a young African-American male problem. A lot of people have been talking to them. They've been to many of the places, and I think more people are energized to turn out and vote. That's something we've got to make sure happens till the polls close, but I think that's coming back in our direction. And getting young people to turn out, which is one of the reasons the Michigan State rally is so important on Sunday night. The Mideast continues to be a very difficult situation in Michigan.
Well, let me follow up with you. And as you cast this race as one that is effectively deadlocked, I mean, it's really striking to hear you say no one has actually won the state yet. Every little data point could potentially make a difference. So I want to ask you about President Biden's garbage comments earlier this week. Of course, he was referencing the comedian who opened for former President Trump, who referred to Puerto Rico as garbage. Then Biden said Trump supporters are garbage. Then he walked that back and said, look, he was just talking about the comedian and his rhetoric. What is your reaction to hearing that? And could that potentially hurt the vice president in Michigan?
I'm going to say this to you, Chris. Everything can move things in one direction or another. But I will. So the comments at Madison Square Gardens, quite frankly, energized many in the Hispanic community. I really do believe that the president did not mean, and look, I respect everybody's right to vote who they believe is the strongest candidate, and that after this election, we've got to come back together. I think the vice president was very clear about how she felt. And I'm not going to say it didn't bother some people, but many of the people who have expressed that to me were already strongly supporting President Trump. So is it influencing some votes? I'm going to tell you right now, we are that tight that every little thing can. But I think the people that most responded to it that are the ones that were already there. I'm not sure. I think the bigger mistake was at the Madison Square Gardens, where the joke was made to begin with.
Let me ask you, Congresswoman, because you also just mentioned the war in Gaza. On Sunday, I was able to speak with Senator Bernie Sanders about someone who is opposed to basically the Biden-Harris administration because of their handling in the war in Gaza. I'm going to play that exchange and get your reaction on the other side.
My own view has been that the United States should not continue to provide financial aid or offensive weapons to Netanyahu's right-wing extremist government. But what I would say to Layla and to all those people who are thinking of not voting or maybe even voting for Trump, Trump is even worse on this issue. While I disagree with Biden and Harris, they are still better, a lot better than what Trump and Vance are talking about.
Congresswoman, is that message resonating, and has Vice President Harris done enough to win over her skeptics on this issue in Michigan?
So I want to say that this is all the communities are hurting. The Jewish community is hurting. The Arab American Muslim population is hurting. And it's also, by the way, not monolithic like any other community. So as we're speaking right now, President Trump's in Dearborn and he's talking to some of those members. But the mayor of Dearborn, who is not endorsing, has made it clear, or has tweeted, President Trump will never be his president. He remembers the things that President Trump said when he was first elected president, the Muslim ban. So, there's some that are going to skip the top of the ticket. There are some that are going to vote for Jill Stein, and some are going to vote for the vice president. And quite frankly, what happens in that community is going to be one of it will impact. It's one of the factors that will impact what happens on Tuesday.
And Congresswoman, just finally, what's your sense of the Senate race? You talked about the high stakes there between Mike Rogers and Alyssa Slotkin.
Look, I think Alyssa Slotkin has been ahead, except in one or two. There was a poll that came out yesterday. These are tight races. And obviously what happens at the top of the ticket could impact it. On that, I would feel more comfortable on giving an edge to Alyssa Slotkin right now, but it's an edge. I'm telling you, we have a lot of very, very close races in Michigan. And anything that could happen between now and Tuesday could and will impact the outcome.
All right. Well, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, it is always so great to get your perspective on what is actually happening on the ground in Michigan. We will be in touch quite frequently between now and Election Day. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a behind-the-scenes look at what authorities say is the new and improved ballot counting process in a critical county in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania. We'll bring it to you. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The presidential election could come down to Pennsylvania. And if it's close, election night could turn into election week. In 2020, the state wasn't called until the Saturday after the election, delivering Joe Biden the presidency. But now some counties are trying to speed things along. In Erie County, election officials have new ballot counting scanners, which are supposed to be more efficient. The county has also implemented new security measures for election officials since the 2020 election. It all comes as Donald Trump and his allies stoke fears about voter fraud in the state, as some of his allies seem to be laying the groundwork to challenge the results if the former president loses. NBC News correspondent Julie Sirkin joins me now from Erie County, Pennsylvania. Julie, great to see you. So let's talk about these new ballot counting machines. How much more efficient will the ballot counting be compared to 2020? Oh. And yes. I think we are having trouble with Julie's audio. I'm not sure she can hear us. We will try once again, and if not, we will bring her back. But obviously, this is a big focus for all of the critical swing states. Here's Julie.
I had some time this morning, a behind-the-scenes look at some of the new equipment they got, some of the new security improvements they've made. They got new scanners, for example. Everybody's going to be in one room this election. I was talking to one election worker, for example, who told me how difficult it was back in 2020 running across the hall. She had to have an escort bring her there. And remember, as you said, PA does not count ballots until after polls close on election night. So it's really important for them to put all of these improvements in place, spending thousands of dollars to make it more efficient, so that the minute the polls close, they can start counting all of those ballots and putting them through the machines. The line that you just saw me walk through, though, Kristen, was actually a lot of people who have not received their requested mailed ballots. That is becoming a big issue here. There was a lawsuit filed by the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, joined by the Republican Party as well, trying to make sure that voters here do get their requested mailed ballots, because there is no early voting and there is nothing that can be done unless they come to the polls on Election Day. That impacts, of course, elderly people, disabled people, kids in colleges out of state. So they're going to have to put even more resources in place to make sure that improvements happen here, Kristen.
All right. Julie Sirkin, great stuff from Erie County, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for that. Coming up after the break, they are on the front lines of the fight to secure the vote on Election Day amid a deluge of potential threats and disinformation schemes, both foreign and domestic. A bipartisan panel of 4 Secretaries of State joins me next. Stay with us. You don't want to miss this. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we continue to count down to Election Day, all eyes are on federal, state, and local officials as they work to reassure voters the election will be both safe and secure. These officials are already facing a number of challenges, including confronting the deluge of disinformation and misinformation from both foreign and domestic actors, to ensuring the safety of poll workers amid a rise of threats and violent rhetoric. Joining me now is a bipartisan panel of Secretaries of State. We are really excited about this segment It's really important information. The Democrat from Arizona, Adrian Fontes, Democrat from Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, Republican from New Hampshire, David Scanlon, and Republican from Kentucky, Michael Adams. Thanks to all of you for being here. I want to start by just setting the scene here. Obviously, we have all seen the violent rhetoric increasing in this year's election. And I know that obviously there's been a lot of focus and concern about the 2 assassination attempts against former President Trump. Secretary Benson, let me ask you, how concerned are you about your state election workers' safety, and what new steps are you taking to try to keep them safe?
Well, thanks for having all of us for this important conversation, Kristen. This is a really critical moment for the future of our democracy, and we're all both on edge and ready for anything. Just today, we've gotten reports about the potential for disturbances on Election Day throughout the northern part of our state. We're ready, and we have partnerships with law enforcement and others to protect the people who protect democracy. We've also passed a new law to make it a crime to threaten election workers while administering elections. So we'll be ready to address any disruptions if they occur. But we're also encouraging people to respect the process, respect democracy, respect your fellow neighbors as they cast their ballots in the historic election. And let's have a smooth and secure Election Day.
Secretary Scanlon, let me turn to you next. How concerned are you about the safety of election workers, and what steps have you taken since 2020 to make this a safer endeavor for election workers?
Well, hello, Kristen. We're fortunate in New Hampshire that we're a small, friendly state, and I am not aware of any threats in polling places that are being spoken about publicly, but we're not being complacent about that either. We've worked with local election officials to make sure that locally they can deal with issues that might occur at the polling place, as they have in every election in the past. But we're also working closely with our state law enforcement partners, the Attorney General's office, and we have a plan if something occurs that is broader in scale that we need to be concerned about. And then, if necessary, we are willing to pull in federal partners to work on broader issues.
Secretary Fontes, are you tracking any active threats against election workers right now?
Thanks, Kristen. We are not at liberty to discuss any of the specifics of our security profile, but we have the capacity to track not only threats from around locally the state, but you know, our borders are open across the United States of America, and oftentimes, as we've seen in some of the prosecutions, threats will come from outside of any of our states into it. So this is a national issue. It's a national concern. We do have to get back to some rational conversations based in reality, based in data, and based in facts. And so while we won't be, again, discussing any of the specifics, we certainly are being as vigilant as possible. And we do have threat assessment folks not only in our office as security space, but operating directly with the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center and other state, local, and federal law enforcement and intelligence gathering agencies.
Secretary Adams, how are you preparing in this regard to keep people safe? And do you feel any concerns for your own personal safety?
Well, I'm pleased to say that this cycle, it's been very smooth so far. We've not had threats of violence against me, let alone against poll workers or other election officials. We spend months and months preparing for this. We've been doing security prep since the summer. We've been working with the federal government, obviously the state police and the attorney general in our state, but also in Kentucky, the sheriff, the county sheriff of each of our 120 counties is on the County Board of Elections. And so that ensures both adequate security from the federal and the state government, but also local knowledge.
All right. Well, let me, Secretary Benson, ask you this. And if you want to respond to what you just heard from Secretary Adams, please do so. But let me read what you wrote on X yesterday. Quote, expect bad actors to take minor issues and use them to fuel baseless conspiracy theories in order to further their own agenda. How are you planning to counter those types of actions?
Well, we all have to plan to counter the misinformation that is escalating, particularly in battleground states where the races for president are particularly close. And we all have to do that by being critical consumers of information in this moment. Well, a lot of what you're going to see on social media, particularly over the next 3 to 5 days, is potentially going to be driven by political agendas, not factual agendas. So go to your local election officials' websites. We've set up a website in Michigan, michigan.gov/electionfacts, to go through and address a lot of the baseless conspiracy theories that are metastasizing. And when I wrote that, I was particularly frustrated of basic minor things that are isolated and rare occurrences in any election becoming metastasized by bad actors who are trying to use small incidents to create a bigger issue and spread misinformation. And that's why all of us are the best line of defense against that spread. We should stand up to being fooled by bad actors and instead be all empowered with trusted factual information about our elections.
And Secretary Benson, just a very quick follow-up. Do you have any concerns about your own personal safety?
Yeah, in fact, last week or a few weeks ago, whenever Elon Musk first started attacking me on X, the first thing I did before responding with facts and the truth was to call my security team and make sure my family was safe. Because unfortunately for all of us, standing up to bullies and fighting back against misinformation in this moment does mean putting ourselves in the metaphorical line of fire, and that's quite unnerving. It's created a state of hypervigilance for all of us, but it doesn't deter us from speaking the truth and making sure citizens have the tools they need to cast their vote in this historical election.
Secretary Fontes, what about you? Have you received any personal threats?
I have, but we will, in Arizona, categorize any threats against myself, my family, or anybody else, as we do with any other election official, that something has happened to an election official. We are, as Secretary Benson indicated, not going to shy away from this fight. And we're certainly not going to be playing ourselves to be the victims of any of this stuff. These are folks who want to undermine confidence and that we as Americans have in one another. And the vast majority of these sorts of misconceptions, conspiracy theories, and lies are originating outside of the United States of America, but they are amplified by folks here in this country oftentimes, and that can eventually result in the sorts of bad behavior and threats that we see and have experienced. And that's really where the problem lies, where you've got Americans acting as useful idiots to our foreign enemies. And so what I'm hoping is that we can do what has been suggested: be better consumers of information, be smarter, and believe in one another as Americans before we just start casting aspersions and doubting with no facts behind those doubts.
Secretary Scanlon, pick up on that point and also let us know, have you received any personal threats?
No, I have not, and I am not aware of any election officials in New Hampshire that have. Again, we're a relatively small state, and so it is very easy for me to get out and speak to groups about transparency in the election process, and inform voters and concerned citizens about the checks and balances that we have in every polling place. And I have made an effort to speak with any group, regardless of political affiliation or theories about how elections operate. And I've been very open and very welcoming, and I think that has tempered the positions of some in the state. I would be surprised if we have any significant issues, but that's not to say that we're not prepared if something does happen.
And we should let our viewers know we unfortunately did lose the connection with Secretary Adams. We're working to get it back, but we will obviously continue this conversation. Secretary Scanlon, let me follow up with you, because earlier this year during the Democratic primary, there was that fake robocall that basically mimicked President Biden's voice, confused a lot of people. How do you counter those types of threats that come from AI that are meant to confuse? Secretary Fontes is talking about the quote-unquote useful idiots who don't serve to kind of cut off misinformation where it starts. Are you prepared to counter that?
I think so. The Biden robocall was a wake-up call to really the entire country about the potential for AI deepfakes. And while that particular event was pretty unsophisticated, it allowed us to work on messaging. Our Attorney General's office jumped out very quickly and informed the public of what happened and the fact that it was illegal, a form of voter suppression. And in the end, they were able to track the individual down, and that person was recently fined $6 million by a federal agency. But knowing that now, we have been talking about the impact of AI very publicly and openly with the voting population. We've been taking the lull before Election Day to just talk to the voters frankly about the misinformation and disinformation that they should expect to see, and rely on their local election officials and their state election officials as reliable sources of election information. And if they hear something about a campaign they question, call the candidate. Yeah. There are ways to check on the information that is out there.
Secretary Adams, I believe we got you back. Yes, we did. Weigh in on this point. We're talking about the threat of AI as well as misinformation and disinformation. How are you preparing to counter that as we get closer to Election Day?
Well, we're already dealing with it. I've spent the last 24 hours dealing with a misleading video on TikTok that got 19 million views and led people to falsely believe that we had vote switching. We don't. We don't even use voting machines. We use optical scanners that read paper ballots that are marked by hand. In some instances, we have ballot marking devices that will print a ballot, but the voter can see the ballot, make sure it's right before voting it. So that's the stuff that I'm dealing with, not AI, fortunately.
It's just extraordinary that it's something that you've been dealing with that recently as the past 24 hours. Secretary Benson, let me ask you, you announced charges against a Chinese national who illegally cast a ballot, though the ballot has already been tabulated, cannot be retrieved. How concerned are you that people will use incidents like that to claim that there's broader fraud, that the system is rigged?
Yeah, I think any kernel can be used and metastasized, and that's what we're seeing right now. In this case, it was a rare and isolated occurrence. It was caught, it was swiftly dealt with, and that person is going to be prosecuted for lying multiple times and breaking the law. That's the way this works. When there is any type of fraud in the process, it is rare, and when it is caught, we seek justice, not just in Michigan, but around the country. And so this is where, again, it's incumbent upon all of us to be critical consumers of information in this moment and not be fooled by efforts to take isolated incidents and make them more that they are in an effort to sow seeds of doubt and cause people to lose rightly placed faith or confidence in our elections and ultimately their voice. And that's really what this is about. There's an effort afoot, as it has been for years now, a concerted effort to try to diminish citizens' confidence in their voice, in their votes, and in our democracy. And we're going to see more isolated incidents in the days ahead, or maybe even the weeks ahead, being used to further that agenda. Don't be fooled by it. Get the facts, know what's true and what's not, and know that all bipartisan professional election officials all across the country are working day and night to protect the integrity of every vote in every election.
Secretary Fontes, I want to ask you about some news out of your state, the recent ruling there, a judge ordering you to effectively turn over the names of more than 200,000 individuals who registered to vote without providing proof of citizenship. You've said you're worried that releasing those names could lead to threats and harassment against them. Can you update us on your next steps? Do you plan to release those names by the Monday deadline, or are you going to appeal that decision?
Well, we are going to appeal the decision. In fact, I think it's already been filed. But let me just level set really quickly. Arizona, like every other state in the union, not only requires an affidavit signature under penalty of perjury that a person is a citizen, but we have a higher standard here that demands that our voters provide documented proof of citizenship, a birth certificate, a passport, a naturalization certificate, in order to vote in state and local races. That's the higher burden that we're not sure if a lot of these folks have met. So they've all met the same standard that every other voter in the United States of America has met. I want to be very clear about that because we don't have widespread non-citizen voting here in Arizona, nor do we have it anywhere else in the country. That being said, I think it's ill-advised at this stage of the game to be able to be forced to release the names of folks who some people might say are non-citizen voters. because of the potential for harassment. So we're going to fight like heck to protect those voters' information.
We're almost out of time. If we could go around the horn very quickly, 10 seconds each, starting with you, Secretary Adams. How long should voters expect the results to take in your state?
Well, in Kentucky, we count pretty fast. I think we'll have 98% of the vote counted by 10 p.m. Eastern. We vote mostly in person. We have a very limited mail-in vote, and we're able to process them before the polls close. And so we count pretty quick.
All right, Secretary Scanlon.
In our state, it's a start-to-finish process. I expect we'll have results being announced by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. There might be some outliers that come in later than that, but it will be on the day of the election.
Secretary Benson, a little bit longer in Michigan?
Potentially. You know, we have pre-processing and tabulation happening now of the 2 million ballots that are being mailed in. So we anticipate we'll have the bulk, the vast majority of ballots tabulated by 8 p.m. on election night. And it may take a little bit longer for any ballots that come in the late hours just before 8 p.m., but they count just as much as the early ones. And we're going to make sure every ballot is counted and hope to have those results in as soon as possible. We'll have an update for folks around 9 o'clock Eastern on election night.
All right. And finally, Secretary Fontes, what are you anticipating?
Well, the networks are going to project when they project. We don't control that, but official results will come in Arizona as they always have, sometime within 10 to 13 days after Election Day.
All right. Well, there you have it. I cannot thank you all enough for this segment, for the work that you do. We know that you're heading into an incredibly busy and critical stretch. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Still to come, could Jewish voters be the key to the Keystone State? New reporting on the importance of that voting bloc in one of the most important presidential battlegrounds. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we've been saying, this election is likely to come down to the margins. And in a key state, a small shift in one party's key coalition could make a big difference. And after the October 7th terror attacks in Israel, Republicans are trying to make inroads with the typically reliable part of the Democratic coalition, Jewish voters. NBC News political campaign embed Emma Barnett has more from Battleground, Pennsylvania.
Bagels, coffee, and canvassing. With just days to go before the election, Jewish voters are door knocking for Vice President Kamala Harris in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
Are you fired up and ready to go?
Jill Zippin, the chair and founder of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania, has organized door knocks, phone banks, and an ad campaign to get out the vote for Harris.
I think that Jewish voters have a deep concern this election cycle with respect to anti-Semitism that they didn't have before, but they see the answer to that problem as Harris walls, not Trump.
According to the Pew Research Center, 70% of Jewish adults identify or lean toward the Democratic Party. But the October 7th terror attack in Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism has some rethinking their vote. Like Rona Kaufman, who calls her plan to vote for Trump shocking.
I've been a lifelong Democrat, progressive. I go to, I've only ever supported Democratic candidates for president.
Rona's disappointed by the Democratic Party.
I'm really concerned about Harris's view on Israel as reflected by some of the advisors that she has selected.
Of all the battleground states, Pennsylvania has the highest concentration of Jewish voters, 300,000 according to Brandeis University. Biden won Pennsylvania by only 80,000 votes in 2020, Trump by 44,000 in 2016. In a state like Pennsylvania, small shifts in key coalitions can make a huge difference in the outcome of this election. That's why the Republican Jewish Coalition is spending $15 million this cycle on ads targeting Jewish voters.
I never voted Republican in my life, but I am voting Trump.
Amen. This trend depicted in the ad is something Rabbi Seth Adelson has seen in his own community.
There are certainly people in my community who, if they are not tempted to vote Republican, perhaps for the first time in their lives. Certainly they're eyeing the other side of the aisle in a way that many Jews have not
done so.
Jewish Republican strategist Jeff Bartos argues Trump has the strongest record on Israel.
Why do I say that? Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, brokering the Abraham Accords, withdrawing from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal.
But former ambassador to Israel Thomas Nides disagrees.
Kamala Harris is going to be great on Israel. I have no pretty clear. I would be standing up here if I had any doubts that in my mind.
He went door to door in Philadelphia, working to get people to vote for Harris.
This vote is really going to matter.
The Biden-Harris administration have done more for the state of Israel than any president has in the history of the state of Israel, without question.
And while Republicans are trying to tap into a community that is feeling unsettled, whether it works remains to be seen.
I do not believe there will be a shift or a change in the Jewish vote. The Jewish vote's important because we do vote and we do turn out.
Emma Barnett, NBC News, Philadelphia.
Our thanks to Emma for that really important piece. We will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll have exclusive interviews with Senator Raphael Warnock and former Republican presidential candidate Governor Doug Burgum. And don't forget to tune in to special coverage on Election Day. We'll have live updates all day on NBC News Now as voters hit the polls, plus special coverage of the results as they come in, and all night long. The news continues with Tom Costello in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.